Well, hello. I believe it's 10 o'clock standard iPhone time, so let's go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome. Thanks everybody for joining us. I'm Robert Pittman, founder and director of the Janus Institute and the Janus Forum, speaking from Rabun County in the Northeast Georgia mountains. Some of you have been to Rabun County for our Janus Forums or perhaps just for vacations over the years. Joining me as co-moderator is Amanda Sutt, CEO of Rock, Paper, Scissors, a branding and marketing firm in the North Atlanta metro area. The Janus Institute has partnered with Rock, Paper, Scissors to create our new Prosperous Places program and website. Good morning, Amanda.
Good morning.
Our topic this morning, of course, is COVID-19 pandemic and economic development. I know that's a huge topic with so many questions. Such as what will be the short and long-term effects on local and national economies, industries, and companies. How can we all cope with the short and longer-term disruptions to our lives, which we're all experiencing this morning, I'm sure. And what is our society and economy going to look like after we emerge from this crisis? This is really like nothing we've ever seen before, obviously. These and other issues will have a profound effect on community and economic development and its practitioners. While we certainly can't cover the whole waterfront today, in this hour that we have, I'd like to focus on three questions, but we will be completely open to whatever questions or comments you have. Those three things I'd like for our panelists to start focusing on this morning are: one, how significant are the disruptions so far to the communities, regions, or states that you represent and their businesses and overall economies? And I know that varies. Two, how have you and your economic development organization responded to the COVID-19 situation? And how have others that you are aware of responded? And number three, a large question, other thoughts on how economic development organizations and developers can respond to the COVID-19 crisis and help their communities and businesses. Now, as you listen, please send us your questions and comments using the chat feature on your screen. Our purpose this morning is to learn from each other. That's how we do things at the Janus Forum. We want to get to as many of your questions and comments as we can. Those that we can't get to, we will post on the Prosperous Places website, along with the webinar content for continued online discussion. To get us started this morning, I'd like to turn to three professionals in the economic development industry that I'm sure many of you know. Ron Starner, Executive Vice President of Conway, Inc., the publisher of Site Selection Magazine. Good morning, Ron.
Morning, Robert.
Rope Roberts, Community Development Manager for Georgia Power. Good morning, Rope.
Good morning, Rob.
And Wiley Blankenship, President and CEO of the Coastal Alabama Partnership, which serves Mobile and Baldwin counties on the Alabama Gulf Coast. Wiley, are you with us? We'll try to find Wiley. Perhaps he can join us a little bit later. We'll start this morning with opening comments from Ron and Rope, and hopefully Wiley, on the impact of the COVID-19 virus that you've seen on your communities and local economies. And of course, you both cover territories, not specific areas. Responses you've seen from community and economic development organizations, and other thoughts on how we can help our communities and businesses respond to this huge shock. And Ron, would you get us started?
Sure. Yeah. Well, obviously, it goes without saying that the shock waves are devastating and they're getting more dire by the day. But I did reach out to a few folks in the economic development community just to see how they were coping. Right here, close to home, here in Georgia, the Georgia Chamber of Commerce surveyed all of its members last week and found that this was around Thursday of last week. By that day, fully 1/3 of all Georgia businesses had shut down completely already. 2/3 said they were still operational, so that's the good news. But obviously the number of shuttered businesses will increase the longer the national shutdown continues. As far as who's impacted the most, so far the hardest hit businesses, both in Georgia and nationwide, have been airlines, restaurants, retail, movie theaters, and hotels, but the economic devastation is rapidly spreading to other sectors. The next shock wave to be felt will likely stretch to colleges and universities, churches, private schools, nonprofit foundations, any customer-facing services sector, banks, car dealerships, real estate, and construction. Anyway, I could go on, but I think for starters, I'll just leave it at that, Robert.
Okay. What about responses that you've seen from economic development agencies, Ron? You're in touch with a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, the good news here is that they are being more responsive than we've ever seen before. I mean, we're really on wartime footing here. I don't think that's an overstatement. Everyone is rallying to the cause. I'll give you an example. The Greater Des Moines Partnership it quickly mobilized to survey its entire membership to find out exactly what their members needed. Then they scheduled a Zoom call with all of their area practitioners so that they could voice their concerns. They banded together with their local convention and visitors bureau to encourage continued patronage of small businesses with things like gift cards and takeout meals. And from what I've seen, Robert, these types of things are happening all over the country, not just in Iowa.
Right. And Ron, based on what you've seen, and I know you've really got your finger on the pulse of economic development and site selection, what are some of your thoughts on other things that economic and community development organizations can do? Any further thoughts?
Yeah, this is actually the topic that I spent the most time prepping on this past weekend, Robert, and I could take up the rest of the hour on this, but I won't. I think everyone's pleased to hear that. But let me just highlight a couple, and if we have time later to get into some things that I will. But the first and most important thing is to begin by taking inventory of exactly where your community is in this crisis. How many businesses have been shut down? How many workers are losing their jobs? What essential services are still up and running? And which ones are down or greatly slowed? This is an area where your business retention and expansion service will be more critical now than ever. I would just, if you haven't done so already, I would encourage everyone to mobilize every staff member you have to reach out to your existing businesses to find out how the crisis has affected them, and also find out, more importantly, exactly what they need both now and moving forward.
That's good advice. I think really we're still kind of in the shock phase of all this and trying to take stock of where we stand. And we'll come back to this with you a little bit later. Rope, would you share with us, you covered Georgia, you've been reaching out to your people throughout Georgia and the Southern Company. What kinds of impacts have you seen in your communities?
Yes, Robert. Most of the industrial sector, which is what I work with mostly, are operating at full capacity. We are seeing some restructure their shifts to avoid people being in the same space at the same time. And I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Largest disruption, as Ron just said, is the retail and restaurant business. Those affected by people every day. We are starting to see
Rope, we're having a little trouble hearing you. You were loud and clear a while ago.
Am I loud and clear now?
You're better.
Okay. As I was saying, the largest disruption is in the retail and restaurant business, whereas the industrial sector is operating full capacity. We see the retail and restaurant businesses closing, but they are making creative changes. We see and we're hearing the auto industry, which different parts of Georgia are affected differently, but as the larger operational plants close, we having many of the secondary and third tier industries here, we're starting to hear that it's going to be a slowdown, and it's coming in a few weeks in the near future. The housing industry, the governor on Friday of Georgia deemed as a necessary industry. So that is still open, and it covers quite a few of our industrial sectors that are affected by housing. So overall, Robert, what we see, and this is from communities, and what I'm hearing is we're operating it fully with all our industry. People are employed. We may have to move the shifts a little bit to make everybody work. Non-essential people are working at home. But business continues to go on. They are reviewing it day by day.
Well, of course, Georgia is fortunately not one of the hard-hit states. We're certainly not to the New York, California, or Illinois stage. So, yes, it's obviously going to get worse before it gets better. From your contacts across the state, what have you seen the response of community and economic development organizations to be? Can you share some of that with us?
Yes. First of all, our organization, of course, we're a public utility, but Georgia Power is keeping the lights on, the electricity flowing to the homes, businesses, and industries all over Georgia. That's our primary business. Our employees who are directly associated with that are working safe and carefully to provide that service to the people of Georgia. And all employees who are not directly associated with that task, that service, are working remotely at home, such as myself. So, but local manufacturers, when we look at and I've listened to and read different reports that my communities have been getting as they poll people, the different industries, and I've read and reviewed these. They're operating with procedures to keep their employees safe. That's number one. And they keep them separated at shift turn, at breaks, at meals. They're keeping the social distancing, but they're also keeping their plants clean, and all the areas that are affected by people moving through those areas are constantly clean. And those processes are followed by the code that they are working under. So I've seen that works probably the best. You know, again, the group that gets hit the most with this and how they're responding, the hospitality industry, which in parts of North Georgia is really their entire industry. So the hotels, restaurants, the beaches of Georgia, the tourist attractions, all of those are shutting down. That affects quite a few people that, don't have the money to live on. So that's what I keep hearing back from my local communities all over the state is this is detrimental to the person who really kind of is living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, absolutely. And based on what you've seen, Rope, what suggestions might you have for what community and economic development organizations could do to help?
Well, I think, just as Ron said, and I think we'll get into this with questions from the audience, the chambers of commerce or the economic development organizations that are coordinating the local efforts, they are doing that by phone calls, websites, emails, and they're coordinating with the local industries and businesses. This allows the industries, especially when you have a clearinghouse, and that's probably the biggest function right now is disseminating correct and factual information. And that's what the EDO should be doing, is being that clearinghouse and either having phone calls every day or every other day, and then having websites where they can post local information. And sharing of the best practices between the different companies is a very important tool and resource that local industries can be helped with. Like who is cleaning? Where can I get a cleaner to come in and clean this contaminated area? I've seen that has been very helpful. Now, how they're helping out other businesses, I've seen industries and heard of this where they are hiring the local restaurants, to come in and provide the meals for their employees. That keeps that helps everybody that way. So they are doing that to be able to keep the businesses going, because they do depend on them quite a bit.
Yeah, those are good comments, Rope. Economic development organizations, community development organizations can identify and post those services that are still open and active, and also encourage people to patronize those that are. I think those are great suggestions. And Wiley Blankenship, are you with us yet? Well, hopefully Wiley will join us later, but I will comment, his Coastal Alabama Partnership, I know, sent out an email to all his constituents listing sources at state and federal government levels where businesses and individuals could get help. That's one thing that, of course, a lot of economic development agencies do: business retention and expansion, and that's a similar activity. Where can I get help? Where can I get possibly some short-term financial support, things like that. So I think that's very useful. One thing I'd like to jump into, oh, and by the way, those of you listening, please let us know your questions. Please give us your comments. We're looking to you to provide as much information as we're getting from our active discussion with our panelists. So please let us know your thoughts and things that you see your communities doing and ideas that you have. So please go ahead and get your questions and comments in. One thing, Rope, you mentioned tourism. Of course, it's very important to many smaller communities. You and I live in Northeast Georgia, where it's very critical. And it seems to me that the COVID-19 virus really turns tourism promotion on its head. I mean, we want you to come later, but not now. And I've seen articles about this from as far away as Ireland and all over the country, where tourism promotion agencies are saying, don't come now, because number one, you might spread the virus, and number two, you might place demands on what limited health care that we have. So, Ron, I'll pivot to you. What is a tourism promotion agency supposed to do now?
No, that's a great question, because obviously the only playbook that CVBs and tourism promotion agencies have ever operated on has been to market constantly, right? Keep encouraging people to come, because most of those organizations are funded by motel and hotel bed taxes. So if their motels and hotels are not full, then their revenue, they're taking a huge hit in their revenue. So I think a lot of these agencies are having to kind of cope on the fly, but there are still many things they can do. For one thing, you can certainly be helping the people that are visiting your community right now. Some of them may need to just bunker in place and hunker down and ride this out. If they need to get back home immediately, you can be doing things to assist them, to help them make travel arrangements to get back safely to their destination. But, one of the things they can't, do is, you can actually be a critical player in the whole healthcare supply chain. One community, for example, they've a local college actually volunteered to its resources, because in most cases, most college students have been sent home. They actually volunteered the use of the facilities at the college to the local hospitals and other healthcare workers, whether it be for temporary housing or even to be set up as makeshift medical care facilities during this crisis. So it's possible that CVBs and tourism agencies could play a role in facilitating connections like that. So I would say, the more you can do to form alliances and partnerships with other organizations in your community to help those essential services get by during this tough time, if you can do that, then, I strongly encourage it.
What are your thoughts on tourism promotion in these times?
Robert, the promotion is, you do have to keep people in the forethought, and you have to understand where we are in the whole plan. We're in the winter time. This is when people are making their decisions about where they're going for summer vacation. So this is where the winter quarter is. First quarter of the year is typically where most companies are really sending out this response, thinking about this is when people are planning the summer, and usually May, June, July timeframe. So when you start to think of that and people plan, everybody's put their life on hold. They don't know. The spring break, they're not going to have one. Summer, they're not sure they're going to have one. They don't know at this point. We're in kind of week 2 of the great pause, and we don't know really what the future holds. We can't see 4 weeks out, much less about for 3 months out. So we don't know whether to go ahead and book that vacation for the week at the beach or not. And so I think right now they're going to have to stay in front of them. They're not really sure how to do that because magazine ads are already placed for pretty much in the magazines that people would look at. But you still have to stay in mind, think about us and how do we do that going forward. In Northeast Georgia, I know that we get a lot of people who just automatically come here historically. So it's a matter of what do you do when you get here? Well, what I'm seeing, because I do live up here, I'm seeing people flock up here where the weather's good. They want to get out. So people are not waiting whether or not you're open or not. They're getting out of the large cities and coming to the rural areas and enjoying themselves. Once they get here, they use social media to find out what's open and who can be served or who's got takeout or whatever. I've spoken to people from Florida as well as from Metro Atlanta this weekend, and that's exactly what they were doing. So I'm seeing this firsthand. I also know just from my own experience, this is a dad's personal experience. I have 3 children of my 7 that live in 3 of them live in Colorado, and all 3 are in the travel industry. That they're affected by this. One is a massage therapist. Her business personally is shut down with Crested Butte and the ski resort shut down. And then one works in a restaurant. They're closed, and the other works in a lodging ranch type facility, and they're closed. So everybody's affected, and I see it personally as well as I'm seeing it with the local industries. Personally, I've been trying to get out and in the restaurants myself and frequent those to try to keep the business, keep people, give them tips and so forth to just keep them operating. And everybody is keeping the 6 feet, 10 feet apart. So I applaud the restaurants who do everything they can to serve their customers. But as far as planning, I would say what the businesses have to do is continue to plan, because people will come back. They want to spend their money and they want to get out as soon as this is over.
Absolutely. We have our own Amanda Sutt with Rock, Paper, Scissors, who is an expert in marketing and tourism. So I should ask you, Amanda, what are your thoughts on tourism promotion?
Absolutely. There's a couple things that I want people to consider as they're thinking about how to pivot in this, because it really is a pivot. When you're really thinking about your overall marketing strategy, there's 2 things you should be always focused on. One is converting sales. So like getting people to come show up and have transactions with them. So getting them to spend money. Right now, we know that's not possible. So we need to lean on the other marketing strategy that tourism groups should always be focused on. And if they're not, this is a good time to lean back into this. And that's growing your audience. And so it's really important during this time. There's some shifts that you want to do in your marketing tactics, but really focus on, the simple thing is either growing your social media platforms, your email list, or any of that, so that when everything is open again, you have a very captive group of people who are ready to come back and do business with you. And that becomes an asset for you, for these organizations moving forward. If they take the time to build that list now, so that they'll say, we're going to provide updates, we're going to provide ideas, and really lean into the email, the social media marketing, so that I love the great pause. When the great pause is over, they can have that flood of people back in and really show that they understand that audience. So things to say, hey, if you can't do business with us now, sign up for our newsletter or follow us on social media so you can support us when we're back. In addition to, these are things that you can do now to help us stay open. So
Yeah,
that's just a really important strategy to keep in mind.
Robert, could I follow up on that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so what Amanda said is exactly correct, because marketing exists for a lot of things other than just promoting immediate sales. One of the reasons it exists is to further your brand and to promote your brand image. And if you think about it practically, what we're going through is already the beginning of an economic recession, and we hope it doesn't get worse into a depression, but it could. That's possible, depending upon how long this shutdown lasts. But one of the things that's true is whenever we go into an economic recession, it's those marketers that take the long view that recover the fastest. And so even while we have to all be in crisis mode now and literally just help each other get through day to day with basic necessities, make sure people have food and shelter and clothing, and where possible, a job, or get them to pivot from one job to another. Maybe they go from being a server in a restaurant to being a delivery driver of critical supplies. We can, as economic developers, we can help people through that transition. That's absolutely our primary job right now. But we can't forget about the long-term ramifications of putting all of our marketing on pause, because if we all do that, then we're just going to prolong the economic impacts of this. And so we can't really afford to do that. I'd like to share a practical example, I think, of a good marketing practice and a bad one. And I'm going to start with the bad one. So I'm a Kohl's shopper, and I got an email from Kohl's the other day that said, hey, we've got some great news for you. During this COVID-19 outbreak, we're going to let you extend your Kohl's cash by an extra 2 weeks. Well, great. Like I'm going to run out and use that 2 weeks to go buy more stuff I don't need at Kohl's. That does absolutely nothing for me. Contrast that with what Publix did. Publix supermarkets came out with a press release just a couple of days ago, actually encouraging their customers not to show up at their stores every day, not to show up early, and when they come, only buy what they need. You literally had a company based up, whose livelihood is retail sales, telling people to shop less and to buy less. I believe customers are going to remember those types of brands in the long run and have a much more positive image of them.
That's a good point, Ron. And back to what Amanda said about, and you, Ron, about using this time to work on your brand and do things other than direct promotion. There's a great precedent for this in the profession of economic development. When the investment cycle is down and there are not many prospects, then I know a lot of economic development agencies lay plans for when things come back. They do strategic planning. They do things that they don't have time to do when they're dealing with prospects and times are good. So I think there's a precedent for that.
Absolutely, Robert. And I've thought about that a lot. And one area that brings up is goal setting. I believe now is a perfect time for every EDO to be reevaluating both their short-term and long-term goals, because obviously the existing metrics that most of us use to measure economic development progress are out the window right now, right? I mean, we're not going to know for some time what will be realistic annual and long-term goals for things like capital investment, employment, total projects, average annual wage gain, and FDI, and so on and so forth. So now would be the perfect time to come up with other metrics that can be used to evaluate performance, not just during this crisis, but more importantly, when we inevitably get back to business as usual.
Right. Rope, I'd like to ask you about this. Critical to successful economic development is not only external marketing, recruitment, business retention, expansion, and all those standard activities, and these days, community development, workforce development, which is something I want to talk about in a minute. But we all know that economic development agencies need to be funded. Most of them get a combination of funding from public and private sources. Many of them do. So if economic development agencies can show their mettle to the community and help in unique and different ways, that sure does show the community their value. And secondly, what can economic development agencies do to say, hey, don't forget me? I mean, we're not recruiting business right now, but don't forget about me. We don't want economic development organizations to lose momentum and visibility.
Robert, great points. I would tell you what the local EDOs, what they could do the best at this point in time is to turn inward and to focus on taking care of their communities first. I mean, that would be the basic of community development, of existing industry, of a BRE program. You take care of your industries, your businesses, and you work, if you're an EDO separate from a chamber of commerce, you work with your chamber. You go across the boundaries. How do we help all of our businesses thrive during a very difficult time? So that's your number one, and that can be done by a number of different ways to do it. But most of all, it's important for that organization is to forget about who gets the credit. It's a matter of connecting the businesses that you help, all of the businesses that are still open, to be able to manage effectively and efficiently. At the same time, once you build your community, once you have a strong, you have that network in place, they remember you. And they remember you and going forward. And I think it was what Ron said about Publix and the message they were sending subliminally, the way they were saying, don't buy a lot, don't shop a lot. They were saying, we're all doing our part. That's really what you're saying by helping across the board with the different organizations, coordinating between nonprofits and churches and the different community players and partners. How do you become that catalyst for making everybody understand what's going on and where you can get help? It may be outside of your scope of work. And that's something you need to say, this is basic in community development. How do we help our community maintain where we are right now in the best we can under the circumstances? So that's what's really is most important. Now, how that will help you going forward is that the strong communities, it's just like strategic thought process that Ron spoke of a minute ago. Those who use this time, kind of a downtime, to think, where do I go when we come out of this? It may be that we don't even know, but you still have to plan. Then you respond accordingly as you go forward. But think, where do we want to go? And the communities that have the people, that have the, the workforce that is, that is able to, that workforce that is attractable and is employable, those are the people who actually are going to attract the industries to say, this community knows how to take care of their industries. We want to be a part of that. And that becomes the asset-based community that is attracting the companies because they have a strong community and a strong workforce there. I will say this on workforce, I am seeing a shift I think Ron mentioned it also. And I'm seeing the same thing where one restaurant said, we're closed, but we'll deliver wherever you want us to. So they're using their servers to now become the delivery people to move the meals. And they're offering educational 2-for-1s because they know the parents, with schools closed, they got the kids at home. That's a good way to put the meals out there because nobody wants to cook that much. And so they want to be able to go to their restaurant, but have their restaurant come to them now. So creative ways I'm seeing of doing this, but build that community up, and the EDOs need to be the catalyst of bringing all those people together.
Yeah, thanks, Rope. Amanda, I believe we have a question about how local businesses can maybe change operations or pivot to help.
Yeah, as well as, and this might tie into it, also getting a little bit into the supply chain. So those are two topics I know we want to dive into.
Let me start out with an example right here in our home county of Raven in Northeast Georgia. And it involves the question of, in these times, would you prefer hand sanitizer or liquor? We won't take a survey on that, but my wife Anita, and co-founder of our Janus Institute and Forum, has a good example of a local business that's pivoting to help operations here in Raven County.
Well, if I say moonshine, what part of the country do you think about? It might be Appalachia. There was certainly a lot of moonshine runs that led to the creation of the NASCAR industry and sport. But we have a local distillery called Moonrise. And Moonrise is now pivoting from, they're still producing their liquors, their moonshine, their bourbons, etc. But they are now manufacturing hand sanitizer and making it available to the community at no charge. And to quote Barbara Nassar, one of the owners, we use our high-proof gin, so we're probably not going to run out of that. So just bring a reasonable size container, no vats, please, and come see us.
Great example of a local business pivoting. Ron and Rope and Amanda, have you seen other examples of that? And our listeners, please let us know of examples of local businesses pivoting like that you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, a good example is the film and television industry in Georgia, which has all but been shut down by this crisis. Those workers are quickly being mobilized to do I know of examples of where instead of, putting up and tearing down sets for shows and movies, they're now doing childcare, because as you know, pretty much all daycare centers have had to close. But people who are, who are safe and not exposed, they can watch young children for people who are working in, the critical essential jobs. So, or becoming delivery drivers, or other types of drivers that are needed right now. So yeah, a lot of that pivoting is going on. I did want to address the supply chain question too. So do you want to continue with this, or do you want me to?
No, that's fine, Ron. Go ahead.
So I've given a lot of thought to this, because one of the things that, Peter Zion and others have already identified that the supply chain disruptions that we've seen worldwide that are affecting thousands and thousands of manufacturers in the United States, these disruptions are going to result in a reordering of the global supply chain, whether we like it or not. We will see both supply chain redundancy and supply chain contraction become a must moving forward, because after all, manufacturers that are being hampered by this, they're not going to be able to afford to go through this again. Heaven forbid we were to get a second bout of coronavirus next year, but if that were to happen, it would wipe out a lot of manufacturers who are dependent upon getting supplies out of China and other countries. So the good news, if you're looking for a rainbow in this dark cloud, would be there will be a surge in reshoring that will take place once this crisis is over. And who better to help your local manufacturers set up these redundant and contracted supply chains than your local economic developers, Robert?
Absolutely, especially for smaller companies. And one great service that a lot of economic development organizations can offer is research in historically research in importing, exporting, finding foreign markets. And this is just another great service that economic development organizations can provide companies in their community that don't have time to do this kind of research. And related to that, I'll turn to Rope now. Related to that, and we're getting some questions on workforce development. I mean, the past 2 to 3 years with our booming economy, workforce development has become, just one of the hottest topics we've seen in community and economic development. Well, the labor market's not tight anymore for unfortunately, a lot of the lower skill positions, service positions. All these efforts that we've put into workforce development the past 2 to 3 years, what's going to happen to those, Rope?
Robert, it's a great point. And I was, when we got to workforce, I wanted to talk about that because I am seeing a pivot of people who are unemployed in one industry are now being picked up by others who are hiring. Yes, we have quite a bit in the whole northern part of Georgia of Amazon servicing the metro Atlanta area and all the areas outside. They're hiring. Walmart is hiring. So we're seeing the larger distribution companies that people are sitting at home. Now they're ordering their products, their groceries or whatever, their services, they're coming to them and they have to have the distribution chain. Ron kind of mentioned that. This is more on a local level than coming out from one country to another, which he implied. And I totally agree with. Industries are not going to, they're not going to let this happen again. So, but what we're seeing is, all right, so how do local businesses deal with that? And we are seeing people being picked up and they're moving from being a service clerk to being a driver. That's okay. I mean, that is, you're moving, but also these companies that are, you're adding another shift or you have these industries that are deemed necessary and are staying open and are operating, and most of the manufacturing and in Georgia is staying open. Those can pick up some of these people and put them to work. Now, who suffers for that? Primarily the service sector is going to be the one that doesn't have the people to come back to them because they found another job. But that's the way workforce is, and they move from one sector to another. Then we can we can train other people to come up and take their place in the service sector at that point. So I do see a shift here, and I'm starting to see, and as we stay into it, say about 4 weeks, I will see even more of a shift from the local communities, seeing the people move from the service sector into the manufacturing companies that are still open.
Yeah, this takes us back several years ago when times weren't so good and people were looking at retraining a lot of middle-aged people that had lost their jobs. And now we have a lot of service workers that have lost their jobs. And who knows what's going to happen to the restaurant industry long-term. There's going to be a lot of shakeout. Ron, what are your thoughts on what communities can do with workforce development and retraining?
Yeah, I anticipating that this would be a hot topic. I reached out to the director of Career Source Florida late last week and was able to touch base with her. Basically, what Rope has said is exactly what they're experiencing already in Florida. Florida being even more exposed because of its heavy dependency on the hospitality and services sector than even Georgia is. And their biggest fear is starting to come true, in that there's now a mass exodus of workers leaving the hospitality and services sector and heading into quote unquote more essential jobs right now to keep needed supplies flowing. And their biggest fear at Career Source Florida is what's going to happen when this crisis subsides and restaurants and hotels and theme parks and beaches reopen. Who's going to staff them, right? If those workers have left for other jobs, and in many cases better jobs, who's going to fill who are going to be the servers and the ticket takers and things? And movie theaters are wrestling with this too. And so Career Source Florida, already anticipating that, is setting up programs now to assist those businesses, many of which are small businesses, get back on their feet again from a workforce standpoint. And so I think what you're going to see is there's going to have to be a pivot at the state workforce level, so that certain training programs and grants that were set aside to help manufacturers and others are at that point going to have to be redistributed to help the services sector get back up on its feet.
Yeah, that's interesting. We have a question that's related to this. I think we've covered part of this. Question is, we are foreseeing a problem where colleges and local government training and career centers are now closed or not allowing training at the moment. How are communities placing or retraining displaced workers? That's a real problem. How can you train people when it's hard to train them remotely, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't know that we're to the point yet where we're physically training these people yet. Right now, we're just trying to put food on their tables. But, how do you guys think that colleges are emptying out? Of course, colleges don't traditionally retrain people, at least four-year colleges don't, but community colleges do. So, wow, how's this all going to shake out? Because we're going to have a huge need for physical training, and are we going to have the providers to do that?
Well, I'll start, Robert. I think the way we're going to retrain, and it's given time. Of course, we've only had 1 week behind us, so it takes a while for the IT people to build a network that allows us to support the training from home. That's number one. Second is building a curriculum that allows you to retrain effectively. So what we have to find, and it's a period of time, it requires industry to be able to say what they need, and then build that curriculum, and then a delivery system over the internet. Now, this is, if we stay in this long term, in this type of mode where we're having to work from home remotely, we're going to have to all build up our local infrastructure systems to be able to handle it. And that's the first thing, and be able to have access to it, because not everyone does have access, and things like the local library, which people who don't have home internet can't go to now because they're closed. So we have to have a delivery system. But once that is in place, and I think we'll be thinking of this when we come out of this situation, how do we build this for the future? And I think that is going to be, I see more of the online classes. When you talk about university system, I see we are going to change how universities are attended and students go to school in the future based on this. All of the Georgia public universities are now starting today, are going from online classes for the rest of the semester. Right. So I see that, and the technical colleges, which you call the community colleges, we're doing the same thing. In Georgia, we're doing the same thing starting today. So we could see this, that we have, instead of classes where you're actually present, we're going to start to see a shift toward where we can actually do more of this online to meet people's own time constraints.
Right, right.
Yeah, Robert, Rope
Yeah.
is absolutely correct. This is really an infrastructure issue. Gartner recently posted a report showing that corporations with 10,000 employees or more, that the vast majority of them can only support their VPN can only support about 10% of their workforce working remotely. And VPN sales are up 600% across the board because of this crisis. So, as Ropa said, until we build out the infrastructure, the telecommunications infrastructure to service a remote workforce and remote learning, we're simply not going to be able to do that right now in the short term. So it's an infrastructure problem that we absolutely have to get fixed, and hopefully we'll get this addressed before the next crisis hits us.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question, and I'll address it to Rope. And Ron, you chime in if you want to, of course. And then I want to go to you, Ron, with another, I think, crucial issue after this. The question is, have we seen any state require manufacturing to close, or any manufacturing sector? If so, how do we define what manufacturing is essential and what is not?
It's a good question, and I was reading over the weekend some correspondence from one of my communities to the office, the governor's office here in Georgia, and I can't speak for the other states, but because I'm in Georgia, so I keep up with Georgia. The state of Georgia and the governor's office is not requiring anybody to close, first of all, and they're allowing those choices to be made on a local rule decision. So that's community by community. And what he has, the Department of Economic Development for the state of Georgia is making the decision, and they're actually be hosting any exception if somebody comes and says we need to remain open. That's where the questions will be going, and of course a lot of this is being developed as we speak. So all of this is ongoing, and is changing as we go day to day. So I'm not seeing anybody required to stay closed. I am seeing, and I saw last week, and I would see that this is probably going to take place this week as well. Any industry that can shift their production, they have excess capacity and they have the ability to shift to be able to make products that are desperately needed in the healthcare industry, being asked to shift, like say a non-woven material that can make masks, for instance. They are asking, can they gear up and shift toward that? We had that toward the end of last week. We'll see that going this coming week. And other products that are needed, that are in short demand and supply right now in the state of Georgia, and as well as all across the nation. How can we make the product here? How can we shift our production from producing something that maybe not as needed to something that is critically needed? And we're seeing that shift take place, and companies are responding and saying, we'll do our part and we'll make it.
Right, right. Ron, there's an important question I want to discuss before our time is gone this morning. And that is the whole work at home shift. And is that going to continue into the foreseeable future when companies realize that they can work effectively, many of them, with this remote structure? And the question is, how will this affect the location decisions of companies? And will this help rural areas that now can attract these knowledge workers who can work from home? I mean, are we looking at a paradigm shift in site selection decisions for companies?
Great question, Robert. And there are several ways to attack that. One is, I think a lot of companies are learning through this crisis that they were not as equipped to accommodate a remote workforce as they thought they were. That meant that there are certain things that are falling through the cracks that they didn't anticipate. So hopefully those employers are using this downtime now to sort through those issues and and solve those problems. It's very difficult to do so on the fly. One impact we're seeing already, and this is probably falls under the law of unintended consequences, is that people are working more from home. One study I saw just this morning showed that the average remote worker is extending his or her workday by 2 to 3 hours. And a lot of that is driven by, kind of crisis management and having to do what you have to do to get by. But the work days being longer, people are logging on earlier in the day and logging off later in the day, and working at all hours of the night. So that's, I think we do run the risk of burning out our employees if this lasts for a long time, because people aren't going to be able to sustain that type of pace. Obviously, a lot of people are working extra hours now just to pass the time, because they don't have anything better to do. There's only so much TV you can watch, or, so many board games you can play. So as long as we have to enforce social distancing, people are turning to their jobs. So maybe we're getting more productivity in the short term, but again, long term, that's not sustainable. But to go back to your central question, are we seeing a permanent shift? I think some industries will see, people, there will be a percentage of the workforce that will prefer this arrangement on if not an ongoing basis, maybe more often. I think one of the things that we will see happen, Robert, is a shift to a 4-day work week for a lot of workplaces. That question has come up, and I could certainly see that becoming more standard.
Right.
Robert,
Yeah,
let me comment on that as well. As we close out, I think Georgia Power, as what most utilities, we respond to hurricanes. We have over the years. As more hurricanes come, we set procedures for how we operate under those dire circumstances, not without power. We have procedures set up so when a hurricane comes, we know exactly what to do. I think that is what's going to be seen by these companies. Should I think Ron said it, if we have another pandemic next year with the same thing, they're going to be ready. And that's what they're good about, is setting procedures, writing them, and having everything in place. So when it happens, we go to that emergency. We open the book, we go step by step, and we operate in that manner. And that's what I see is going to set up in the future. We're going to have that set up as an option going forward, whatever the cause may be. That's how our industries and our businesses will respond.
Absolutely. Well, we're about to close out here. Amanda, do you want to talk about how we're going to follow up and continue the conversation?
Absolutely. Just to kind of give you guys a summary of we recorded this session because not everybody could, of course, be here at this time. We'll be posting it on YouTube, and we'll send a link out to you if there's anybody that you want to share this with, because these are critical things. But in true Janus Forum style, this is a conversation and we want to continue it. So we're also going to include a survey out to everyone that we actually emailed last week. And if anybody else wants, please forward this along. We want to figure out how to keep this conversation going and really be that network to help facilitate how does this change keep happening. If we just have this one conversation today, we know right now, day by day, the world is changing, and we want to make sure that we're a good support for you guys. So we're going to send out a survey of how we want to continue this. We have some options. We can start doing regular webinars like this, where we can bring in different people to be a part of that conversation. We're also looking at how we can pivot and in true Janus style, be able to take this group and break out into smaller segments if we want to facilitate conversations to help brainstorming and how do we work through this. We're also going to be posting questions and comments on the Prosperous Places blog as another alternative, so that we're putting this in many different places. So please keep an eye out for the follow-up emails, share knowledge. That is how we're going to get through this, is communicating and working together and coming up with new innovative ways, to really see this as an opportunity to fix gaps that we're finding in our system. As Rope was just talking about, protocols for the next time this happens will be in place. So this is how we'll make sure that our communities are going to end up stronger as we unpause and get back to reality. So we want to be a part of that and help facilitate different communities seeing different ideas, and how do we cross-pollinate that? So keep an eye out for some emails from us.
Right, and that's the nature of the Janus Forum. What we've discovered is that there's a great body of knowledge with the economic development professionals, and where we really can learn is sharing that with each other. There's no playbook for what's going on right now, and we have to make one as we go along. Help us make that playbook, and let's continue to learn from each other. We will, as Amanda mentioned, be sending a survey out. Also want to mention that you all probably got the email, those of you that are SEDC, Southern Economic Development Council members. They're having a webinar on this topic tomorrow, Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. And Ron, I believe Conway is doing one on Friday.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What time is that? You know?
Sorry, I'll have to get back with you on that.
Okay.
We can include that in the email. We are also at Rock, Paper, Scissors doing one on adjusting goal setting and how do you shift your marketing tactics during this period. So we can do a little list of different educational resources for this week at least.
Yes, yes. Okay, well, Ron and Rope, hey, thanks so much. Great job. You guys were well prepared, did a lot of great research, and had some good ideas for us. Our thanks to you, and thanks to all of you that joined today. And keep your questions and comments coming through the survey, through prosperousplaces.org. Again, like Amanda said, this is really just the beginning of the conversation. Ron and Rope, any closing thoughts or words of wisdom?
Well, the only thing I would say, you're right, it is day by day, and keep positive and keep connecting with the companies and the people out there. It is about people. So let's don't overlook the individual people's needs as we go forward with this.
Yeah, and my final thought would be, you use this time now to invest in yourself and further training and in the training of your people. IEDC, SEDC, Conway, Janus, we're all providing great resources here that can help you move forward and be better at your job. So there's never going to be a better time than now to take advantage of all of these resources.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Rope. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And everybody have a good day, and please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.